We are back on It's Always Game Day in Cincinnati. Lindsay Patterson, Mike Santagata. Mike, what's up?
Not much. No, not really too much going on. There was that stretch. I saw like 3 movies in a row. It was great. And then I thought about going to see the Blue Beetle movie because they had good reviews. And then I was just busy yesterday. That was about it. We're back into the grind. We're back into the grind of writing and everything else.
Yeah, back in the grind of football training camp. It's the last week of training camp, which I always kind of feel like training camp's over the week before the last preseason game because it's not open anymore. The practices are a little more behind the scenes. The people, when it comes to media, they're there for a certain period of time, and then we don't see anything about the walkthroughs that happen earlier in the morning. But preseason game number 3 is coming up. We'll get to that on Thursday. I want to back it up just a little bit to the tie against Atlanta. Let's start with the offensive line play because I think that's been the topic of discussion again all offseason when it comes to right tackle Jonah Williams, Jackson Carman. What did you really take away from some of the starters and just even backups in general when it comes to that play on Friday night?
I think Carmen looked fine at left tackle. It's probably below his playoff performance, but I mean it's above what he showed in preseason week 1. To me, he just seems like a left tackle only backup, and I think they're going to be comfortable keeping that. I don't know if he's even going to be the first left tackle off the bench because you might move Jonah Williams over. It could be Deontay Smith because I think Deontay has also looked a little bit better at left tackle than he has at right tackle, but he's more versatile and can play both. It could be Adeniji. We still don't know. There's a ton of options there, and I'm not sure which one they were going to go with, but I think that game kind of showed to me that Carmen is left tackle only as a backup because they moved him to right tackle and the results were poor again. Deontay, I thought wasn't as good in this game, Deontay Smith, but it feels like they might like him as a swing tackle. But that's a hard read for me right now because they're giving him those snaps. They're letting him play both sides. He's doing okay on both sides of the line. What do you think? Are you able to read it all? Because I think Carmen's going to make the team, but I think they're going to pick one of Adeniji or Smith because keeping both's a little redundant, having a guy that can swing both sides and he's got some issues here and there. What's your read on that? Do you think that they just know what Adeniji is and they're just giving Smith these reps, or do you think it's Adeniji's behind them?
I obviously think with this coaching staff, they want to take the best player available in that position. I think they have really hard decisions to make for the depth on the team overall in a lot of positions, but I think they know what they have in a Hakeem. But at the same time, he's also had the opportunities in a starting role. And yeah, it's nice to have that safety because you never know what it looks like towards the end of the season. And he's been in playoff games, really important games, the Super Bowl. But I think performance is what matters. And do they feel like there's more potential with Smith and just keeping him on the roster and just saying, look, we know what we have with Hakeem, but maybe it's time to move on?
Yeah, Hakeem looks the same as he always does, which I think in the preseason against 2s and 3s is good. But Smith, you don't know what you're getting, really. I think it was a little telling that Carmen started at left tackle instead of Smith. So that's why, and he's a second-round pick. The last time they cut a second-round pick, I think, was 2002. So he's probably going to see the end of that deal unless there's anything comes out. Well, I guess something did come out and they still kept him. So, if something else comes out, I don't know. But I see, and I think there's value to Carmen on the field too. I think they want him as the extra offensive lineman, especially before Lyle is healthy. They want him to, because you can run block from either side. That hasn't been an issue. All the issues with the right side has been pass protection because it's just when you learn run blocks, I'm going to learn how to reach left and I'm going to learn how to reach right, or how to take, my drop step and inside and I can't remember inside zone to my left, inside zone to my right, base blocks, everything. Pooling, that would be the one thing, but the extra offensive lineman isn't really going to pool that often. So you usually just learn that basically one way, at least for pulling kick and pulling lead versus those pin pull. But I'm getting into minutia. Nobody cares about this point. I think he's fine as a run blocker on either side. So you can use him as the extra offensive lineman, the pseudo tight end for those formations. And he provides value there because he has a lot of power. I'm not saying he's a fantastic run blocker, but I think he can move people. There are some issues, and that's usually getting to the right spot and sustaining his blocks and tracking at the second level. But when it comes to just, why can't we just like knock that guy backwards? He could do that. If you ask him to knock a guy backwards, he could do that. He could do that better than Smith, Adeniji, probably any of the backup offensive linemen and some of the starters. And that's why I think some people are very excited about the idea that he might have been able to steal that right tackle job. But comes down to it, I never really thought it was a real competition.
No.
He was no longer in that. I mean, probably before preseason week 1, but preseason week 1 really showed that he wasn't in that competition. It's interesting. He's an interesting player and what to do with. If you don't think of the value of a second round pick and everybody else that went around him, there is a use for him on the team. You just kind of have to ignore, like, they could have had Creed Humphrey or Trey Smith, and now they're on the Bengals' biggest opponent for the Super Bowl instead.
I mean, that miss hurts. And it's one of those things, like, we could look at all the drafts that the Cincinnati Bengals have actually had. You could go to 2020, 2021, and even this really optimistic, youthful class of 2023 and say, hey, look, they hit on a lot more than they missed. And with drafts, it is hard to do that because there's a lot of unknowns. So, yeah, maybe you're saying we hit this guy, this guy, this guy, but we missed on Jackson Carman. But when you see the people who were available near the Jackson Carman pick, it's really hard because that's a position group that you want to go young in. You don't want to pay those big time contracts to when it's an offensive line, and you have to the good ones. And Joe Burrow needs to be protected. But overall, Jackson Carman, it feels like a huge disappointment. It's really unfortunate. But I think if you put him more on the left tackle side as depth piece, and that's where he's getting his reps, and just focus him on the left side at tackle, then maybe that'll be helpful for him with Frank Pollock. And then obviously Orlando Brown Jr., hopefully is able to kind of mentor him in that position. And that would be huge for the season. But I agree. I think Jackson Carman's on the roster. This will probably, I thought you could have asked me last year when we did a podcast. I probably said, is he on the roster in 2023? And I would have said no. I would have said no way. But there were times that they needed him. And offensive line depth is extremely important. And if they feel more comfortable on the left side, do you think in the last preseason game, he's going to just play the majority of the left tackle spot, like the majority of the game? Or do you think he's going to get a lot of snaps?
That's going to be interesting. I think he's going to get snaps. I don't think he's going to be rested or anything. I mean, what are you resting for? He's not a starter.
Yeah,
Put him out there. Put him out there. See if he can do anything on that left side. Really show you not. Right. Don't play Jonah, because then you might have to have the discussion if there's an injury. But yeah, I think you play him on the left side. You try to get him more experience on that left tackle spot. He doesn't have a ton of in-game experience, just those playoff games and this preseason for the most part. I want to get your feel a little bit on, do you think the left tackle backup, it would be more important than a right tackle backup because Lyle Collins is at least hopefully coming back at some point this season? Or would you rather have that swing tackle that can do right or left, but isn't at as high of a level?
I see. That's a really good question, because I think about what the offensive line looked like in 2021. I think about what the offensive line, it got better last year for the majority of the season when they got more reps and chemistry together. For me, this is my hot take with Lyle. It's obviously important to let him get healthy, fully healthy, and they're not rushing him back like a Trey Hopkins situation when he came back from his ACL injury. And they're like, get back out there and start. And that was way too soon. And I feel like he never rebounded from that injury. But with Lyle, take your time. Hopefully Jonah can be just average. I just need average. If he's above average, then fantastic at right tackle. And then you have Orlando Brown.
Good in that game too. We haven't talked about it yet, but he looked pretty good.
And I am excited to talk about that, but just overall with Orlando Brown Jr., a lot of people are saying, and I hate saying this because I know how Kansas City fans take it, and I don't mean it as a shot to Patrick Mahomes. Everybody knows he's the best quarterback in the NFL, but I feel like maybe Orlando Brown Jr. will see a little even more. It's crazy to say even more success with Joe Burrow because he's been to Pro Bowls. He's been, I would say, a pretty valuable offensive lineman. And then he gets to be on the left side with him, and hopefully, that just helps Orlando Brown. So I'm not answering your question, and I promise I'm going to. I think swing tackle is more important.
Yeah, it's such a weird situation though, because we're calling these guys offensive tackle 3. And even though Lyle
Mhm.
Collins isn't going to play left tackle, I think he's offensive tackle 3 on either injury when he's healthy. If Jonah's healthy, you just slot him into right tackle. If Brown gets
Yeah.
hurt, I think they just flip Jonah over and put him in at right tackle and put Collins in there. So if you're talking about offensive tackle when Lyle's healthy, at least offensive tackle 4 and offensive tackle 5, which hey, offensive tackle 4 did see the field
Yeah.
last year in the playoffs, but usually those guys aren't relied on as much. So it's a lot of talk and hot air about a guy that I don't think he's going to see the field unless there's real bad injuries or an injury early on.
Well, here's my curveball. And
Okay.
I said Cordell Wilson is my breakout player of the year. What if Jonah is playing
Collins left guard.
absolutely fantastic? He's doing his job. Orlando
Mm-hmm.
Brown is doing a great job. What they paid for. And then you're like, we do have a weakness. We have a weakness on the offensive line. But Lyle is fully healthy. Do you put him in at guard?
I think in a vacuum you could. I
Mm-hmm.
think when you think about the confidence needed to play in the NFL, and we've seen what happens to higher profile positions, quarterbacks. I think about it with corner all the time. If you lose a little confidence, I do think that you could do that. Put him in for Volson if Volson doesn't take a leap or even regresses back a little bit. I think you could put him
Mm-hmm.
in there. But if it was me, man, it would have to be bad because I don't want to take him out if I feel like he can get right. Uh, I don't think just because he's not playing as well as we think Collins might be able to. I've thought about
Mm-hmm.
this with right tackle too with Jonah. It's like I'm probably not pulling Jonah even if it's slightly
No.
below average. If I think he's going to get better throughout the year, then I'm going to leave him in there. If it's bad, legitimately bad, yeah, you move to Collins, sure, but I'm not expecting bad. Maybe that's optimism. I'm expecting average, and I thought he played above average in that Falcons game, which that was against ones. It wasn't against the twos and threes. Uh, yeah, it's tough because you have to deal with the confidence and the ego, and these players are people. They're not just like in Madden.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you just find whoever the best 5 are, you flip them all around the positions, and I don't like Volson in there. I want a guy with power. I'm just gonna move Collins over to left guard and let Volson play the bench, and Volson won't be mad about it because it's a video game. But when you
Yeah.
think about it, like dealing with the real players, I feel like it's harder. And I don't have any. I don't think I have any good Bengals examples for that.
Mm-hmm.
The one I thought of was Billy Price. Was well, Billy wasn't really playing well before that, before he lost his
No.
job. But I do think it probably got a little worse when he did lose his job, and then they tried to bring him back when people got injured. So, yeah, I think in a vacuum you could. I think it would have to be bad for me to do it though. And if you do that, does that? It might shut the window on the Volson experiment. That's what would be my huge worry is that
And
you
they
do
don't want
that for
that.
that light upgrade. Yeah, right. You don't want to do that because you're limiting what could be a cheap contract for you if you're thinking money wise with all the guys you have to pay, but also a guy that's young ish, but
Mm-hmm.
young NFL wise and is still learning and hopefully getting better. You're hoping that he can just progress into a higher end starter rather than being possibly a liability. I think he was your breakout player. I don't know if I could see that, but I think he is going to be better this year. I think he'll be better
I
than
do
he was
too.
last year. Yeah. I
I
don't know if
I
I
do
could see
too.
him full whatever breakout means, whether that's Pro Bowl or that just means that guy's real good.
Mm,
Do you think he can
a break.
become as good or better than the two guys, the other two other guys in the interior? Or do you think he's going to, even with the breakout, still be the third best interior lineman on the team?
I think I think breakout for me personally would make him. You want to be behind Alex. He's going to be behind Alex Kappa, but he would be the second. That's what
Okay.
breakout would mean to
Yeah.
me.
Okay. So
But
as
at
good
the
or
same
better than
time,
Karras.
yeah. Ooh,
That's possible.
ooh.
It's possible. It's
It
possible.
is. It is youth age. Yeah, we'll say that. But overall, I think the most important thing is they keep Lyle Collins on the roster, and I think that's extremely important. Just overall, you take your time with him. You know, he could be a piece that is. We don't know what's going to look like with Jonah Williams, but we did get a little bit of a glimpse of that in the preseason game, and I want to get to that next in our next segment on It's Always Game Day in Cincinnati. We are back on It's Always Game Day in Cincinnati, segment 2, offensive lineman. We could talk about those for 3 segments, but we will not. We will start segment 2 with Jonah Williams in preseason game number 2. What did you think?
I thought he was legitimately good. I I was surprised that I liked him as much as I did, both in the run and the pass game. I thought in the pass game, he put out a clean bill for me. I think there were some weird things that happened along some of the other things that may have some people saw like, hey, that guy got kind of close to Jonah. One, I think Simeon drifts, and that is as an offensive tackle annoying that a guy's just
Mhm.
going to quarterback's going to keep going and going. It's like, you're making my job real hard right now. Like, can you stay over there? But the second one is I was surprised. Like, the thing I was most surprised about is he looked powerful on the right side. And it was against the ones. Like, it wasn't against practice squad guys or backups. This was against the Falcons starting defensive lineman. There was at least one play that made me, and I posted it, but I just went, oh, like, wow. I didn't know he had that in him. And I'm fully into a Jonah Williams surprise breakout season, even though the
Mhm.
Bengals, there's a small chance they could keep him, and by that I mean 0.001%, and it's very dependent on some other guys getting extended, but and it would be a franchise tag. It would be if he plays at like not Lane Johnson, but let's say Brian O'Neill level or somebody like really good right tackle, and you already signed T and Burrow. It's like, well, let's just throw a
Mhm.
franchise tag on Jonah and run it back with the right tackle.
I
I don't
mean,
see it
I've
happening.
seen
That's
stranger things, but I
sure.
still feel like the closer we get to September 1st, the more likely that a franchise tag would be used on T Higgins the next year because
Oh, of
I
course. Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah, right. This would be if T
Mhm.
and Joe are both signed.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was surprised at the power because there was one play. It was a double team, and he was going to climb up to the linebacker, and he knocked this. I think it was he was on outside shoulder of the guard. He knocks that 3 technique all the way over, and then still turns around and then blocks the linebacker out of there as well. And I was like, okay, if Jonah can bring this as well as some
Mhm.
solid pass protection, I mean, that's a level up from what he was at left tackle even in his best year. So I'm rooting for it. I hope he can stay healthy. I think that's a big one, and not just healthy as in he's playing games, but healthy as in his performance doesn't take a dip, because I think
Yeah.
he played a lot of last year after the knee thing injured, and that didn't help him. He didn't start good when he was healthy either. So I'm hoping, he's going to start better and just keep that clean bill of health going throughout the year. I thought 2021, he was an above average left tackle. I did not think that last year, but can he be an
Mhm.
above average right tackle? I thought his feet, which is the hardest part of playing right tackle, look good. I thought they looked good. I think that's the hardest part of making that flip from left to right, is that in pass protection, what used to be your kick foot is now your drive foot, and what used to be your drive foot is now your kick foot. Everything's flipped, but he didn't look like he had any issues with it, even though last time he did it was 8 years ago.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. Above average Jonah would be so huge for Joe Burrow and just this offensive line in general because I have all the faith in the world in Alex Kappa. Orlando Brown Jr., I still want to see what he looks like out there with this team, and it might take a little while. We might look at that first game and look, they're going against, I would say, a very legit defensive line. When you see Myles Garrett over there, it terrifies me just a tad bit, thinking that's the first game with this offensive line together. Obviously, Ted Karras, Cordell Volson, Alex Kappa, Jonah Williams, they've been on the offensive line together, but Jonah switched on the right side. You have Orlando Brown Jr. What does that look like? And, we're one game away where it just truly feels like I don't see any of the offensive line starters getting any reps on Saturday, but Zach could surprise us and be like, you know what, let's put him out there for one game and see what it looks like. But it just kind of more feels like that's their fourth. It's their technically fourth preseason where you're just going to put the bubble players and the guys fighting for a roster spot. And there's still a lot of offensive linemen who will be fighting for a roster spot. So when it comes to depth, I think that's going to be an intriguing conversation that we are going to see with the Cincinnati Bengals overall, because it is almost cut down. I want to say it's 8 days away from the majority of the rosters just getting chopped down.
Yeah. It's that Friday, right?
Yeah.
So that'd be more than 8 right now. 8 days.
It's coming up. It's coming up.
It's coming up.
It's gonna be here soon, and it's gonna be absolutely crazy in the NFL, because if you're the Cincinnati Bengals, and let me ask you this, because I think offensive linemen are more important than a tight end, but say a tight end is cut, and a pretty legit tight end, that would be your 1 and 2 with Irv Smith. But there's also an offensive lineman as a depth piece. Who are they signing?
I think Sharping's going to make the team. I think he's been, to me, the clear best backup interior guy, both at center and guard. If it's an interior guy, it just strikes me as like there have been interior guys they could have looked at, though, and they haven't. And I think that they signed Cody Ford, and even if I don't think he's been great, I think he's been fine. Well, somewhere around there. And for a backup, I think they might keep him as well. But if they get an interior guy, I could see it. I think they know they have too many tackles. They're not going to go sign a tackle over a tight end, but interior guy maybe. I do think tight end's probably more likely. And then the other waiver wire cut down guy that I have floated around as the idea is Brandon Allen doesn't make that 49ers team. We already have the backup quarterback issues. There's one we know. Do you think they'd look at him?
I saw people on Twitter today actually apologizing to Brandon Allen. They were like, we're sorry for everything we said about you after watching some of this backup quarterback play for the Cincinnati Bengals. And I actually want to talk about that right now. Look, I get it. If there's a scenario where Joe Burrow, it sounds like he's going to start week 1, but say Joe had to sit out at one point during the season for 2 to 3 weeks, I wouldn't say the season's over. I think you still have a very talented roster, but when you watch some of that quarterback play, it is absolutely terrifying. And I don't know how you win with those backup quarterbacks, because that's extremely important. So I get the concern when it comes to the backup quarterback position, but a lot of NFL teams, if their starter went down, their season would be over. So I don't get too upset about the situation. It's hard to find good backup quarterback play in the NFL. And like I mentioned before, a lot of teams are in a very similar spot. But what do you think about backup quarterback play, and who's going to win that job?
That's tough. I don't think either guys separate themselves. Do you?
Not really.
No.
Not really.
I mean, I think they both have glaring issues. I think Simeon has an NFL arm. I don't know if Browning does. Which for a backup, you don't need a real good arm, I guess. Sure. But it sure does help. I think Simeon, like I mentioned, he drifts. I mean, I don't think Browning is a model of pocket presence either. I think so what it boils down to for me is I feel like Simeon wants to play in structure, and he wants to just use the offense as it is. And what I think Browning does is he's kind of with that one read, and then he just plays backyard football. There are a few plays I thought he had something if he stuck in the pocket, but he kind of makes a guy miss and goes run around, does something crazy. Sometimes it's great. Those scrambles, big gains, love them. And then sometimes he rolls to his left and just fires the ball right out of linebacker. You kind of go like, whoa, let's dial back the chaos a little bit. If it was me making the decision, though, I'd go Browning, because if my backup quarterback's going to be bad, relatively, is going to be not a high-end backup,
Yeah.
I want chaos thrown in there rather than just like, well, maybe we could run a system with this guy. Give me the chaos. Give me the Skylar Thompsons of the world. Miami Dolphins quarterback in that playoff game. He kept him in that
Dude,
Bills
he
game.
almost won.
Yeah, because he played in chaos. He wasn't playing his,
That was wild.
He would get the ball. Look, all right, can I throw a deep ball to Waddle? No, I'm going to go run around and find somebody open, play some backyard football. It was great. They almost won the game. If you can get that out of Browning, awesome. You may also just get a all-time bad, he's throwing like 4 interceptions, and you might have to look at a third quarterback in the game type of game. But give me the chaos. Give me the variability that he could play really well, because I don't know if Simeon to me is better if you're going to miss Burrow for a long time. And I'm hoping that doesn't happen. If I'm going to miss Burrow for a half, a quarter, think of like what Chad Henne. Well, Chad Henne was kind of the more Simeon of the.
Chad Henne's the reason why the Chiefs won that AFC divisional game against the Jags,
and the one against Cleveland like 3 years ago, the divisional game. Yeah, so he's done great. I don't think Trevor Simeon has played at Chad Henne's level. This is really where that is.
Except for that one game against the Bengals a long time ago. He had a really good game. I can't remember.
Sure, and Brandon Allen had near a perfect passer rating against the Houston Texans in Burrow's rookie year. Just throwing bombs to AJ Green and T. Higgins. It was great. Yeah, I'm at the point I want the little bit of chaos, the variability of a Jake Browning if I have to pick between the two. Because if I need a quarter, if I need a half, I want that guy to come in and be Taylor Heineke. I want to be Skylar Thompson rather than he comes in and, I mean, we've seen it with Brandon Allen even. It's just like he comes in there and he could play below average. I don't know. I don't want him to come in AJ McCarron type. Just because they can play a similar role to the starter doesn't mean that they should be the backup quarterback. I feel like you can get the highs of some of these chaos creators and roll with that, especially when they haven't put anything out on tape yet. Because I think that also plays into it. Is if you're showing that you do that all on tape, you might get some looks from defensive coordinators that ruin it for you. But if it's just one game, variability, crazy stuff, yeah, give me Taylor Heineke. Do you agree, disagree?
I hope they're not in a position where I have to see any of the backup quarter. It's been enough. It feels like this training camp has been 20 years long because, I mean, look, we're used to not having Burrow during training camp. It's pretty normal in Cincinnati, but at the same time, watching this quarterback play has been so bad. I'm more of, hey, have Joe Burrow take his time, be ready with their rehab program, what they have going on. Zach Taylor just still, again, when it comes to updates, nothing too detailed, but he feels optimistic that everything is going fine. Joe's going to be there week 1. But I just don't honestly do a coin flip when it comes to both quarterbacks at this point. I just don't know the better backup, what backup quarterback you're going to be in a better position for. I honestly feel like, you mentioned it with Brandon Allen. If he is available, which he probably will be, they bring Brandon Allen back and they carry 3 quarterbacks and maybe Jake Browning's back on the practice squad.
Yeah. I think that could be it, is that they thought they might get an upgrade in Simeon and Brandon Allen. Maybe he wanted to go try out and see if he could go be the starter in San Francisco with all the turmoil. Neither one of those things happened. They just kind of go, we weren't so bad, were we?
No. And there's more actually. Well, there's more I want to kind of get to with the quarterback stuff and Chris Evans, all of that in our next segment. But with Joe Burrow in general, so the Cincinnati Bengals are less than 3 weeks away from the opener. Zach Taylor said jokingly, Joe needs 1 rep, he'll be fine, and he'll be good to go. We don't know what's happening behind the scenes. He's still throwing. Things are happening, but, he's obviously not out there during the open practices that the media is out there. When does Joe Burrow need to take the field so you're not concerned?
I don't know if he does. I think my concern would be if they start questioning whether or not he'll actually play week 1. But yeah. I would guess practice week of game 1. That's where he needs to practice, but he could not practice next week and I'd still go, okay, yeah, we're still on the right path. Great, guys. And then he's just out there Monday. Awesome. Great. We're in. Yeah.
It seemed like Brian Callahan, who's really honest when he talks to the media. It felt like last year they were it was a difficult position because he's gaining weight. He's putting more weight on. He's been in all the meetings, everything that's happening. He's been throwing we just don't see all the time that Joe Burrow is having his throwing sessions. He was throwing 50 to 60-yard bombs before the preseason game almost 2 weeks ago. So everything seemed to be going all right there. I would agree with you. I think if it's game week and he's taking his first like in media practices with the team, then I'd be like, all right, he's gonna be fine. I do think his contract, the contract stuff doesn't bother me. I still think it's as long as it's done before they step on a plane in Cleveland. I know a lot of people are starting to feel like, hey, if it's September 1st and Penn is not on the paper, I'm a little concerned. It just feels like maybe that's a next week thing. You get the contract extension wrapped up, you take the field the week after. So we'll see when it plays out. But I don't know. I
Yeah,
feel like no news is good
the
news.
contract stuff is the one. I feel like I'm more concerned about the contract being done than I am about Joe
Really?
Burrow playing week one. I don't really have any
Really?
concern about Joe Burrow playing week one. The contract thing I think could bleed into next year, and that's starting to get to. You don't think so?
Well,
I mean, we're late.
no,
It's late.
I don't think so. I don't.
Okay.
I think if it's there's actually more I want to talk about with this, and we're over in this segment, and we're going to continue the Joe Burrow contract extension talk because there's more to add to it. Next on It's Always Game Day in Cincinnati. We are back on It's Always Game Day in Cincinnati. I'm bringing it to our next segment because we were over and Joe Burrow contract extension. So you think there is a possibility that this does not get done
Oh, it's
this year?
not. Yeah, it's not a high possibility. But if you're asking me like who am I more concerned about between or what am I more concerned about, Burrow playing week one or Burrow having the contract done this year? It's probably Burrow having the contract done just because we don't have any updates or anything. And we don't have the same level of like, I feel like every medical expert has said like he should be fine and all this other stuff. It makes me feel like he's fine for week one, guys. When it comes to the contract thing, I go, I think we're fine. And they're going to pay him. It's just, are they going to pay him this year? Or are they going to pay him next year? Because you do have.
You don't want to go into
I
that.
know
It's
you
only
don't.
going to get larger. You do
I
not. You
agree.
want to. And I agree. I agree with you. But I think as a Cincinnati Bengals front office, they would be doing a huge. That would be a mistake to go into the season without Joe Burrow being paid for 20 billion different reasons. But the majority of it is what the quarterback market's going to look like next year, and you're going to save money by extending him now, even though it's not about saving money. They do endorsements, sponsorships. They sold the name. They did all of this in prep for Joe Burrow's extension. Go get it done. And I honestly think, and maybe again, I'm too optimistic. I honestly think that no news is good news.
Okay.
Because maybe Joe's saying, look, I would have thought Joe Burrow was the first one to get done this offseason. Joe Burrow wasn't the first one to get done. They were able to get Logan Wilson done. I still think they're trying to do the T. Higgins extension. Nobody is saying that. No, not one person. We're not even hearing his agent talk. T. Higgins is still showing up to everything, but I think it would be a bad idea if you're anywhere but the first round and you're setting out your rookie contract. It doesn't really help you in any way. So I think that's probably on the Bengals side. But overall, I just feel like, look, let's see what they can do with T. Higgins, and then you figure out the math with Joe Burrow. They have the numbers. They probably there's some smaller detail that they're working out when it comes to Joe. So for me personally, I think
I don't have like a high level of concern. This might speak more to my level of concern for Burrow's availability week one. I don't really have any concern there.
Yeah, which is totally fine. And the thing is, they do have the safety net of the 5th-year option, but I think it gets done. For me personally, I think fans are feeling like, oh, this is so wrong. You don't have this quarterback done. But no, they're working together. Who knows what the stop point is right now or what conversations they're having. We don't know. Ian Rappaport doesn't know. Adam Schefter doesn't know, because if they knew, you better believe they'd be talking about it or they'd be tweeting something according to their sources. And they have been really quiet. There's been absolutely really no news surrounding that. It's more of Joe Burrow when he's going to return. So yeah, me personally, I agree with you when it comes back, when it comes to Joe being back on the field. I think if it's a week before the regular season and he's back out there with the team, then all right, Joe Burrow's going to go against Cleveland. But hopefully they just get it all out of the way. And like we said before, friends of the show, the Cincinnati Bengals, I wish they would go ahead and get it done before a Tuesday or Thursday before we record. We are recording early on this Tuesday. I highly recommend they wait until Wednesday or Thursday and they don't drop it tonight, because you won't hear from us until maybe we'll do an emergency pod. Who knows? But overall, I feel like We'll see. But no super big concerns. We'll go back to the preseason. Sorry to totally get off topic and talk quarterbacks. But we'll go back to the preseason because I joked on this podcast. I said Chris Evans hype is back, but the Chris Evans hype might be real, and Chris Evans might be a big part of the running back room. What do you think about that?
I do think he's shown more than Chase Brown so far. That's my main.
That's your take on Chris Brown? That's Chris. I called him Chris Brown. Chris Evans.
Yeah,
Oh,
Chris Evans.
Sorry, Chase.
Combined,
sorry, Chase Brown.
Two.
Chris Evans. I'm messing both of you up. But do you think that? Give me your depth chart in the running back room outside of Joe Mixon.
Trayvon's a wild card. Like, I feel like he still might be running back too. I think he will be. I think then it's Chris Evans, then it's Chase Brown. It's not even Chase Brown's fault when it comes to running the ball. I think his blocking has been putrid. Not that Evans has had great blocking, but I just feel like maybe I'll have to just cut up every Chase Brown run and to double check. But like, I feel like every time he gets that ball, like he's got a guy in the backfield free running at him. He had one run on Friday that was real good. It was inside zone rep, and he just navigated some tight spaces, worked through it, got upfield, stayed on his feet through contact. It was great. But other than that rep, I can't think of too many times he had decent blocking. Chris Evans at times still does the I'm not going to follow this play, I'm going to go be an athlete in space type of deal. But it's mellowed out a lot from where it was before. He mostly is sticking to the runs. There's just one rep of a counter play that he just went backside and went rogue and got 0 yards. And the first week there was a rep of zone that he made the right cut at first, but then he cut it all the way back rather than getting back on the path, and it caused a holding penalty. Where have we heard that before? Chris Evans caused a holding penalty somewhere. But yeah, I think Chris Evans has done better work in pass protection. I think we know he's the best pass catcher of the group. I think Chase Brown in pass protection has been below where I expected, and I didn't expect him to be a high-end pass protector this year. So he's running into the lineman a lot, and he's kind of at least 2 times, it might have been more, he runs into the lineman trying to give a chip and gives up a pressure. Like, that gets charged probably to the tackle, but it's on him because he got in the way. Like, the tackle's in control on the rep, and instead of doing one of those hit the guy as he runs by or just run around the outside so he can't sprint upfield, he kind of runs into the tackle and gets caught. And then the tackle's got to go like, I have to work around you to get to. We've all been there.
Yeah.
Well, sure. I think of it.
I've been there.
I've been there in basketball situations where it's just like you're defending a guy and then another guy comes walking by and that defender just starts walking into you. It's like, I'm defending the guy with the ball. Go around me. Like, don't get in my way. You're not helping. That's kind of what it feels like. So, yeah, I think Chris Evans has shown more in pass protection. He missed a pickup, but other than that, he was pretty clean. He doesn't have the best technique, and he's not very big, which is why I think they're going to go with Travion Williams for that role. Yeah. But I think he's shown enough to be running back 3. I think he's shown enough to make the team, which neither one of us expected. We both thought this would be the year he gets cut, but then he finally shows he's got something to him that's more than just athleticism. He's got a little bit of running back technical ability to him. And I think the team's going to like that. He's been a little bit more consistent this year. So I think they're going to keep all 4. It's possible if you keep 4 running backs, are all 4 active on game day? Like, is Chase Brown a healthy scratch early on? I would keep him around though. But I feel like I'd keep him just because as a runner, I keep feeling like he's got the most home run potential. Even Chris Evans is like that high-end athlete. I think Chase Brown, in my mind, still has the vision and ability to set up defenders better.
Yeah, and I want to talk about another room when it comes to depth, and it's just one of the things that they've been able to do is draft wide receivers. It does help when you're picking in the top 5, and then when T. Higgins is left there in the 2nd round. But just overall, you look at Yoshi and Charlie. What did you think from their 2nd preseason game?
I thought Charlie in the slot was much better than Charlie outside. He had a pretty good game. He played every single rep in the slot. Last week, or the week before, whatever you want to call it, he played a majority of them in the slot, but it felt like all of his targets came outside and he was not able to generate any separation on the outside. to me, that is a little bit of a skill issue, but it's also because he's not very big and he's not elite fast to really threaten defensive backs vertically, and they're not afraid to jam into him. And he's not strong, like as strong as like a T. Higgins, Jamar Chase that could just take that jam and just run through it. He kind of gets pushed to the sideline. Yoshivas looks good. I'm
Mhm.
surprised. I'm just surprised that he was one of my guys going in there. I
Yeah,
predicted the
he
Bengals
was.
would draft him, one of my only hits. But I also just thought, like, I mean, you don't teach that size athleticism combination. And if you think that he's got more to him than just size and athleticism, take him in the draft somewhere. And if you depends how much you think, maybe if it was real high level, you'd go in like the Charlie Jones 4th round, 3rd round type thing. But if you weren't as confident in it, or maybe you just thought nobody else was as into him as we are, we'll get him in the 6th like they did.
Mhm.
So I think he's definitely making the team, which that was always a fun conversation at the
Oh.
start before everything started. It was like, you're not going to cut this guy. He's going to make the team.